All right, everybody, our clock says 4 o'clock, so we're going to get started here. My name is Eric Hayden. I'm a meteorologist with the Weather Service in Morehead City, joined by senior forecaster Carl Barnes. He's going to talk a little bit more about the coastal flooding in depth. Forecast has not changed a great deal from yesterday. We just want to reiterate the potential for this storm, main concerns, gusty winds, and also that potential for coastal flooding, refining that forecast as we go on. Storm total rainfall, we'll start with this with some folks logging on still 2 to 3 inches of rain across our area. It still looks like a rainy day, especially later in the day on Sunday and Sunday night. Biggest concerns with this, if we get any heavy rain in a short period of time, urban areas, low spots, roadways, you could have some water on them. More of a travel concern than anything. During those periods of heavier rain, they will pond on the road from time to time. And again, that rainfall will occur, especially late Sunday afternoon into tomorrow night will be the heaviest amounts of rain. Peak wind forecast, largely unchanged from the briefing you got this morning. The strongest winds by far at the coast. Still expecting some wind gusts, 30 to 40 miles per hour inland. So this could blow around some of those Christmas decorations, some of those inflatable Santas and reindeers and stuff like that. So folks really should bring that inside or take them down. The concern with wind is as you get closer to the coast itself, 50-mile-per-hour winds or higher along the immediate coast of Onslow, also Carteret County, so places like Cape Carteret, Emerald Isle, Atlantic Beach, Morehead City itself, those areas. Then as you head north and east, the strongest winds across the Outer Banks, we could see some gusts in the 55 to 60 mile per hour range, especially Hatteras Island and Ocracoke Island. The real core of the winds will be out toward the Gulf Stream, where we still expect some wind gusts near or exceeding hurricane force winds as we head through, especially Sunday evening and Sunday night. That looks to be the core of the wind speed. I'm going to hop out of here and go to our point and click forecast. If you've been on any of our webinars, really love this product, really encourage you to use it. Weather.gov/Morehead City. If you click anywhere on the map and get your local forecast, scroll down the page and on the lower right will be the hourly forecast. It's a great tool for your planning purposes. I have unchecked everything that I'm not concerned with, things like temperature and dew point. So we're just focused on wind speed. This is for the port of Morehead City. This is tomorrow. You can see the winds picking up. And then from late morning tomorrow, Sunday at 11, through Sunday night, at least into the first part of Monday morning, 8 a.m., you're still blowing out of the southwest there. Long period of sustained winds over tropical storm force. So those ports, most of our waterways are going to have an extended period of tropical storm force winds sustained, and then we'll have some of those gusts approaching 50 miles per hour in some spots. Excuse me, this is for Buxton. I got the order mixed up. This is for Hatteras Island. So you can see, again, those wind speeds really picking up during the day Sunday, up in the 30 to 40 mile per hour range for gust, and then the peak wind Buxton between 5 and about 9 o'clock, close to 60 mile per hour gust. I'm going to switch gears and then go over to the port of Morehead City, which I thought I had up at first. For this area, again, about 11 a.m. on Sunday, you get some gust up over tropical storm force, but this purple line here is surface wind sustained above 34 miles per hour for at least a good chunk of Sunday evening. So prolonged period of sustained tropical storm force winds along the immediate coast, especially the waterways, and then we'll have gusts on the order of 50 miles per hour down toward the Crystal Coast, closer to 60 for the Outer Banks. One thing that has not changed, the wind direction, as you can see on this graph, primarily from the southeast tomorrow and tomorrow night. That could lead to extensive coastal flooding. In addition, that wind shifts into the southwest, and that will kind of shift gears over toward the Outer Banks. That's where we're going to bring Carl Barnes in. He's been at the office today, has really looked at some of the coastal flooding. Carl, the wind direction hasn't changed. The wind speed really hasn't changed. Are we still looking at the same values that we thought we would with the briefing from this morning?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Not major changes from this morning. We're still looking pretty consistent, but as we're getting closer in time, confidence is increasing. So we're now 24 to maybe 36 hours out from some of our greater impacts. So we're having more confidence in the wind forecast that we've been making. So I just kind of want to run us through kind of area by area breakdown of what we can expect with the coastal flooding threat. So kind of in order, first things first, we'll go Oceanside. So our Oceanside, specifically Oceanside overwash threat, is going to mainly be focused along the coast south of Rodanthe, but really more so probably south of Cape Hatteras. And that is with those strong southeast winds in advance of the approaching low. There's going to be a very large southeast swell that builds through the day as well. So southeast winds, we're looking at that essentially pushing the water straight into the coastline of like coastal Onslow with that perpendicular direction, pushing those southeast, the southeast winds pushing the water into the inlets and into the beaches. So our overwash areas like North Topsail Beach, especially as you get close to the inlet there, we're going to be looking for the potential for overwash with the very large building swell and also the elevated water levels. So our first high tide tomorrow is late morning at the beach. That's about 11 a.m. to noon. And then we know, it takes a couple hours to push inland through the rivers like the New River and the White Oak River in that area. That first high tide, the swell is still kind of building, but that is our higher water level tide. So the combination of those two, looking at mostly minor to maybe some localized moderate impacts from both the overwash and just the high water levels, mostly around inlets. And then as we go through the day, that southeast wind builds and the swell really fills in more. The evening high tide, so that would be between about 11 p.m. and midnight, that high tide is expected to be just a little bit lower, except for there's going to be a lot more swell. So that will kind of counteract, and we're expecting, again, mostly minor to maybe some localized moderate impacts from overwash with that high tide too. But with that high tide, the swell will be built much more, so maybe aerially we'll see those overwash impacts spreading up the coast. So Cape Lookout National Seashore could see some overwash impacts around like Great Island Cabin Camp, maybe even some areas near the lighthouse. And then moving on up to Ocracoke Island, kind of the typical eastern part of the island, we could see some overwash onto 12. Not expecting it to be major in terms of doing damage to the road or really completely eliminating the dunes, but at least interrupting travel, especially with around the time of high tide, especially with that evening high tide tomorrow, when the swell is going to be very, very large. We could see some disruptions to travel. And then continuing up to Hatteras Island, I know that area just on the east side of Hatteras Village is more vulnerable. So maybe seeing some impacts there as well with water and sand on the roadway. North of Cape Hatteras or north of Cape Point, the swell is not coming as directly into the beach, so much less certain that we'll have overwash impacts from Cape Point to Rodanthe. And then north of Rodanthe, the swell is mostly oriented along the beach, so should be minimal overwash impacts for the northern Outer Banks. All right, and then we can switch back to the other side. We'll go back down south and look at inshore. So again, looking at areas along the rivers, along the western part of Vogue Sound with those southwest winds, that's kind of going to push all the water toward the western edge of the Gulf Sound. So Soundside, Emerald Isle, Swansboro, Cape Carteret, those areas, again, mostly minor, maybe some localized moderate coastal flooding impacts, maybe even up as far inland as Stella. And then looking at Morehead City and around Beaufort Inlet over toward the town of Beaufort, mostly just minor impacts is what we're expecting in that area, with the winds being, again, oriented a little more parallel to shore, not pushing the water inland quite as much for that. And then as we move over more toward down east, the water or the wind orientation, not so much favorable to move water on Core Sound, but for some areas like Davis, sea level, some of those areas on the western shore of Core Sound, they could see some slightly elevated water levels as well. And then moving on up to the Neuse River. So our primary concern there is going to be with the southeast winds that are moving in and peaking tomorrow evening. So it's really going to be oriented just to push water up toward New Bern. So it's really just that far inland reach of the tidal Neuse River up around New Bern and Bridgeton. Those are the areas where we're most concerned for tomorrow. Looking at potentially 2 to 4 feet of inundation, so minor to moderate inundation around those areas. And then other areas like around Havelock and around Oriental and some of the areas on the north side of the Neuse River, those areas are going to see less inundation, but still potentially maybe 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 3 feet of inundation. So still just some minor impacts possible there. And then moving up a little bit further to the Pamlico and Pungo rivers. So these really look like the areas where this strong southeast wind is going to push the majority of the water from the Pamlico Sound. So we're going to see moderate to probably major inundation for some areas of the Pamlico and Pungo River, especially around Washington, Bellhaven, maybe Bath. Those areas could see as much as 4 to 6 feet of inundation. We try not to directly compare two storms, but of course it was just with Ophelia where we saw inundation numbers that were similar to that 4 to 6 feet. So not going to be exactly the same type of storm, but in terms of the actual expected inundation, those numbers would be very similar to what we saw with Ophelia. And then we are expecting those strong winds to peak in the evening. So once the winds start to back down late evening and overnight tomorrow night, we should see those water levels start to recede. Continuing to move further north, the sound side of the Outer Banks could potentially see low water levels as all that water pushes to the west side of the sound through the evening tomorrow. But then as soon as the low moves past and those winds switch back to the west, that's when we'll see the water starting to probably rapidly rise along the sound side of the Outer Banks. So it's a little bit uncertain what the wind direction is, whether it's west or northwest as the low is departing, and that does make a difference for the exact locations of the most inundation sound side as we move into Monday morning. But right now we're expecting kind of the area from like sound side Buxton up through maybe Oregon Inlet to be where the majority of the Pamlico Sound water kind of sloshes from the inner banks back toward the Outer Banks. That's going to be our targeted area of most inundation, probably 1 to 3, maybe 2 to 4 feet of sound side inundation. So some low lying sections of 12 across, maybe Pea Island, Avon, Rodanthe, the Tri-Villages, kind of the normal areas there, could see some water on 12 and some minor to maybe moderate inundation of some like parking lots and properties there. Now, the last area that I'm going to mention is the most challenging. So that's up around Roanoke Island and Soundside Northern Outer Banks. That's going to be very dependent on, as the low's moving away, the exact wind direction and the duration of the strong winds. So the winds on the backside of the low that are coming out of the west to northwest are going to be much weaker than on the front side of the low, but we are still expecting maybe gale force winds at least for several hours. So that is enough, as we've seen in the past, to move at least some water. At this point, we're expecting mainly just minor sound side flooding across Roanoke Island and the Northern Outer Banks, but that could have some impacts around areas like Colleton, downtown Manio, Soundside, Nags Head. They could see some minor inundation, and that would be mostly like very early Monday morning through maybe mid-morning, a couple hours after sunrise. And then as those winds decrease, then we'll see water levels getting back to normal. And that's the same thing for the sound side of Hatteras Island as well. We should see water levels getting back to normal, or at least dropping below flood stage as we move into late morning on Monday. So very complex system with a bunch of different wind directions. So definitely, if you have any questions, please ask them after we're all done with the briefing, and I'll be happy to answer them. So I can throw it back to Eric now.
All right, Carl, really appreciate that. That was outstanding job for details. And as he mentioned, if you got any questions, we'll hold those for the end, is how we usually do it. So you all should see a program that we showed yesterday. As if that was not enough, the heavy rain, the wind, and he did an extensive in-depth analysis on the coastal flooding. We don't want to let our guard down. With some warmer air coming into our area, we do have the potential for some severe weather, especially Sunday evening, the possibility of a tornado or two that could enhance areas of damage across our region beyond just the gusty winds we see. What you're looking at right now is something called CAPE. All it is fuel for storms. If we get above a certain value, we have plenty of wind. We know that. But if we have enough fuel for thunderstorms tomorrow evening, we could have a few of those tornadoes. So we're going to animate this graphic. I want you to focus on the yellows, especially the magentas and the oranges and the reds. Those darker shadings, that's where we have more fuel expected for the storm, and that's where we expect the highest chance for severe weather tomorrow evening. So this is 4 o'clock on Sunday. As we animate this towards 6 o'clock, anyone shaded in yellow has some fuel. The oranges, the reds, and the purples, that's where we have the highest amounts of fuel for these storms. This is 8 o'clock on Sunday evening. Again, from Greenville south, but especially Havelock, Emerald Isle, Beaufort, Morehead City, over through Jacksonville. And then as we get into tomorrow night, 10, 11 o'clock, kind of swings up toward the Outer Banks. This happens a lot with your proximity to the Gulf Stream. under the gun, places like Ocracoke and Hatteras Island. Our main concern with this is these would be quick, short-lived tornadoes if they occur. Make sure folks have their phones charged up. Make sure they're not on Do Not Disturb. Make sure they're able to get those warnings. As people go to bed, that's when we become concerned that they won't get those warnings as we issue those later in the evening. As we get after midnight, especially 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, all that fuel for the storms goes out over the ocean and our severe weather threat is over. So roughly about between 4 o'clock and midnight or so is the main severe weather threat. Really anywhere in and near this yellow shaded area, this is the slight risk from the Storm Prediction Center out in Norman, Oklahoma. Not talking a widespread event, but 1 or 2 tornadoes could produce some enhanced areas of damage. And again, that time frame would be in the evening. People are going to bed, want to make sure they have ways to get those warnings, multiple ways if the power goes out. So really